church for granting me this opportunity to speak to you this morning. First of all, I want to give honor to the pastor of this church and to the associate ministers here. And when they asked me to speak, I was wondering what in the world I was going to talk about. But since this is Men's Day, I thought it would be appropriate that I address something that had to do with we men. And my attention was drawn to a passage of scripture that really, on the surface, doesn't seem like that it really pertains to men, because it is the 13th chapter of the book of 1 Corinthians, which is commonly known as the love chapter. It is the chapter in which Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, that church which he founded on his second missionary journey. And he's addressing some problems that were occurring in that church. But I'm going to read to you beginning at the 8th verse through the 13th verses. And as I read, I'm going to come back and show you something how that there seems to be a verse in here that seems to be out of place. Beginning at the 8th verse, charity never fails, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, charity. These three, but the greatest of these is charity. I'd like to speak to you for a few moments this morning from the subject, looking for a real man. Now, this being Men's Day, I thought it was appropriate that we address we males as men. Now, first of all, we have to define, what does it mean to be a real man? Is it the biggest, strongest guy around, or the guy that's got the most money, or the most possession, or the guy that has the most respect? For years we've struggled to define exactly what a real man is. Women have shared that frustration, not knowing what to look for when they are looking for a real man. As men, we often have difficulty deciding who we really are or who we want to be. You see, for the title man is full of expectations that quite often change with the varying social context. Women are often heard saying they want to find a real man, implying that there's some men that are not real, that there are some boys that are masquerading as men, that there are some imitators. Now, at the core of our manhood, it's not defined by who others think we are, even by who we think we are, but by who God says we are. Now, ladies, to you, men are extremely important. Whether it's your father, your brother, your son, your boyfriend, or your husband, your relationship with men, sometimes it can be a great source of joy, sometimes of confusion, and sometimes pain. It reminds me of an anonymous prayer of a lady that I read once that was praying. She said, Lord, I pray for wisdom to understand my man, for love I can forgive him. And I pray for patience for his changing moods. Because, Lord, if I pray for strength, I'll beat him today. Scripture text for today, Paul's writing reveals what is known to Bible students, I mean, you know, those that read the Bible more than once a week, as the love chapter. Now, this 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul is, like I said, he's writing to the church at Corinth. This was a church that Paul founded, and Paul is dealing with some issues in this letter that had arisen in that church. Now, in this 13th chapter, Paul begins to tell them about the importance of love in being able to do God's will in all spiritual matters, because they were arguing about spiritual gifts, and there were some other problems that Paul addresses in the 7th chapter of this book. But what's interesting is in the middle of the discussion, Paul throws in a statement in this 11th verse. Because in the 10th verse, Paul is talking about the second coming of Christ. In the 11th verse, he talks about being a man. Then in the 12th verse, he's talking about looking in a mirror. Now, it looks like Paul had, something interrupted Paul in this 11th verse, because what does being a man have to do with looking in a mirror? And as I looked at this, and once I decided that, I'm going to figure out some way to figure out what Paul is talking about when he talks about looking in a mirror and talking about being a man, because otherwise this verse just doesn't fit. And so I started looking in commentaries. But what's something interesting? Most of them, they are focusing on love, and this 11th verse, they just kind of skip over as if though it's not important. So I tried to figure out now, what is it Paul is really trying to tell us in this 11th verse and in the 12th verse, where he talks about, we now see through a glass darkly. Paul is talking about looking in a mirror. Now, Paul uses in this 11th verse, he says, but when I became a man. What Paul is saying is that there was a time in my life that I realized that a change had taken place, and all of a sudden I realized, hey, I'm now a man. And Paul says now notice now, when Paul says when I became a man, he defines it as saying, I put away childish things. Now notice Paul didn't address his age. Because oftentimes, the law says, you get to be 21, in most states, legally, you are considered a man. If that's the case, then unfortunately, there are a lot of 20-year-old folks that are running around here that's been living 40, 50 years. Now, some of you will catch that on your way home. But, I can recall in my own life, this question of what constitutes a man arose. My mother and I were extremely close, and I remember when I reached that ripe old age of 21, I went in and she was standing in the kitchen, and I don't remember what she was cooking, but she was stirring in a pot. And I told her, I put my arm around her, I said, Mama, now your boy is a man now, I'm 21. And I remember she didn't even look at me. She never even stopped stirring. She said, boy, the day you become a man is when you can make a mistake and admit it. Now, I didn't think too much about what Mama said,